The silence that shattered glass. The crystal chandeliers of the Meridian Club cast fractured light across marble floors that had witnessed a century of wealth. This was not a place where ordinary people dined. Membership required more than money. It required legacy, influence, the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. On this particular evening in late autumn, the dining room hummed with the quiet confidence of people who had never been told no. Marcus Townsend moved through this world like a man who owned the air itself. At 52, he commanded a tech empire worth $14 billion, sat on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies, and had the kind of political connections that made senators return his calls within the hour. His face appeared regularly on magazine covers under headlines about innovation and disruption. What those articles never mentioned was the particular way he looked at service staff, as if they were furniture that happened to move. The waitress who approached his table that evening had worked at the Meridian for 8 months. Naomi Chen kept her hair pulled back in a simple bun, her movements efficient and practiced. She had learned early that invisibility was a survival skill in spaces like this. She brought water without being asked, anticipated needs before they were spoken, and never made eye contact longer than necessary. To the members, she was simply part of the elegant machinery that made their evenings run smoothly. "Your Dover soul, Mr. Townsend," she said quietly, placing the plate with practiced precision. He didn't look up from his phone. "It's cold." Naomi paused. The plate had come from the kitchen 30 seconds ago, still steaming. "I can have chef prepare another immediately, sir." "What I can have," Marcus said, finally raising his eyes, "is competent service. But apparently that's too much to expect from—" He gestured vaguely at her, the sentence trailing off in a way that completed itself perfectly in the silence. 3 other members at his table shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Another studied her wine glass with sudden intensity. "I apologize, sir. I'll speak with the kitchen right away." As she reached for the plate, Marcus's hand shot out and gripped her wrist. Not gently. His fingers pressed into the tendons hard enough to make her breath catch. "Do you know what I pay to eat here? Do you have any concept of what your incompetence costs me?" The dining room had gone quiet in the way expensive spaces do when something is happening that shouldn't be acknowledged, but can't be ignored. Conversations didn't stop. They lowered. Eyes didn't turn. They glanced. "Sir, I need you to let go of my wrist." Her voice remained level. This was the remarkable thing, what nobody in that room could have known. That her heart rate had barely elevated, that her breathing stayed controlled, that somewhere in her mind she had already calculated 3 separate ways to break his grip and exactly how much force each would require. But she didn't move. Not yet. "You need?" Marcus's voice rose now, performing for his audience. "You need? I'll tell you what you need. You need to remember your place. You need to understand that people like you serve people like me. And when you fail at that very simple task, there are consequences." He released her wrist with a deliberate shove that sent her stumbling backward into the table behind her. The crash of porcelain and crystal hitting marble echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. A wine glass shattered, red spreading across white linen like a wound. Naomi caught herself against the table edge, her hands finding balance automatically. For 3 full seconds, she stood absolutely still. Everyone in that room would later remember those 3 seconds differently. Some would say she looked afraid. Others would claim they saw something cold settle behind her eyes. A few would swear they knew somehow that everything was about to change. The manager was already moving toward them, his professional smile fracturing. "Mr. Townsend, perhaps you should train your staff properly," Marcus interrupted. He stood now, straightening his Tom Ford jacket. "I expect her terminated immediately, and I expect my meal comped. Are we clear?" That's when he made his mistake. He stepped toward Naomi, one hand reaching out. Whether to push her again or simply to emphasize his dominance, nobody could later agree. But he moved into her space with the absolute confidence of a man who had never been physically checked in his life, who believed his money made him untouchable in every sense of the word. What happened next took 1.4 seconds. Naomi's weight shifted almost imperceptibly onto her back foot. Her front hand came up, not in a fist, but open. Palm out. A defensive frame that looked passive, but created a precise geometric barrier. When Marcus's hand came forward, hers guided it aside with minimal effort, redirecting his momentum. Her other hand touched his elbow, barely, a whisper of contact, but in exactly the right place at exactly the right angle. His own force, his own aggression, became the mechanism of his undoing. Marcus Townsend, billionaire, influencer, power broker, found himself face down on the marble floor with his arm controlled behind his back in a position that caused no damage but allowed absolutely no movement. He couldn't even turn his head. The dining room exhaled. Or maybe it inhaled. The sound was something between a gasp and the absence of all sound, a collective held breath that went on and on. Naomi's knee rested lightly against his shoulder blade. Her voice, when she spoke, remained that same quiet professional tone. "Sir, I need you to stop moving. You're not injured, but if you struggle, you will be." "Get off me!" The words came out strangled, pressed against expensive marble. "Do you have any idea what I'll do to you? What I can do? I will destroy your life. I will destroy everyone you've ever—" "Sir, please stop talking." She wasn't breathing hard. Her hands weren't shaking. This was the second remarkable thing. Her absolute, perfect calm. Later, the security footage would show her checking his airways, ensuring his face wasn't pressed too tightly against the floor. She had immobilized a man 8 inches taller and 80 pounds heavier without visible effort, and she had done it with the same controlled precision she brought to setting a table. Phones came out. Of course they did. 17 different angles of the same moment, uploaded to 17 different platforms before the manager reached them. The video would be viewed 43 million times in the first 24 hours. But none of those millions of viewers would see what happened in the 30 seconds before security arrived. The way Naomi's eyes swept the room, making brief contact with each face watching her. The way she nodded slightly as if confirming something to herself. When security did arrive, 2 men who knew Marcus by name, who had been paid by the club he helped fund. She released him immediately and stepped back, hands visible and open. "He assaulted me," she said simply. "I defended myself. There are witnesses and cameras." Marcus scrambled to his feet, his face the color of rare meat, a vein pulsing at his temple that his doctor had warned him about. "This woman attacked me. She—" "Sir," one of the security guards interrupted, and there was something in his voice that made Marcus stop. Something almost like regret. "We need to review the footage." "Footage? I don't care about footage. I want her arrested. I want her—" But the manager's phone was already out, already replaying the moment. The guard's expression shifted as he watched. Marcus's hand gripping, Marcus shoving, Marcus advancing. And then that brief, precise movement that looked almost gentle, but had ended with a billionaire on the floor. "Mr. Townsend," the manager said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss. She assaulted me in front of witnesses. Call the police." So they did. The police arrived 14 minutes later, by which time the video had spread beyond the dining room, beyond the club, beyond any hope of containment. Detective Sarah Okonkwo watched it twice on her phone before she even entered the building, standing in the lobby with her partner while the manager nervously explained the situation. "Let me see if I understand," Sarah said. Mr. Townsend grabbed her wrist, shoved her into a table, and then advanced on her again. "And she defended herself." "Well, yes, but Mr. Townsend is a valued member and we need to consider—" We need to consider assault and battery, her partner interrupted, which is what I saw on that video. They interviewed Naomi in the manager's office. She sat with her hands folded, her posture straight but not rigid. When asked to describe what happened, she did so with the same calm precision she demonstrated on the floor. "Has Mr. Townsend behaved this way before?" Sarah asked. A pause, brief but meaningful. "Not with me, but with others. I've heard things from other servers, but I can't confirm them directly." Sarah exchanged a glance with her partner. "Would you be willing to press charges?" Another pause. Longer this time. What would that accomplish? It was an interesting question. Not whether she could, whether it would matter. "It would create a record," Sarah said. "It would make it harder for him to claim you're the aggressor. And between you and me, it might make other people willing to come forward." Naomi looked down at her wrist, where Marcus's fingers had left red marks already purpling into bruises. "He told me he would destroy my life. He can certainly try. But you've got 17 different camera angles saying you defended yourself against his assault. That's about as clean as self-defense gets. And the fact that I'm black," Sarah finished. "Female, working service, yeah. I'm not going to lie to you, those things will be used against you. But that video doesn't care about any of that. It shows exactly what happened." Naomi nodded slowly, and something settled in her expression. A decision made. "Then yes, I'll press charges." Marcus Townsend's lawyer arrived 40 minutes later, a man named Douglas Reeves, who wore Italian suits and the particular expression of someone who had never lost a case he actually cared about. He found Detective Okonkwo in the lobby. "This is ridiculous," he said without preamble. "My client was defending himself against an aggressive employee who—" Sarah held up her phone, the video already cued. "Watch this. Then tell me again who was defending themselves." Douglas watched. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did the calculation. Views, virality, optics. "My client is willing to drop this matter entirely if the young woman agrees not to press charges." "Your client doesn't get to drop assault charges. That's not how this works." "Detective, let's be realistic. Mr. Townsend is a prominent businessman. This woman is a waitress. Who do you think the DA is going to believe?" "The 17 cameras?" Sarah said. "I think the DA is going to believe the 17 cameras." Douglas's smile tightened. "Then perhaps we should discuss settlement. My client is prepared to be very generous." "You mean pay her to be silent?" "I mean compensate her for her distress and allow everyone to move forward." But they had misunderstood something fundamental. This was the third remarkable thing, the one that would take days to fully reveal itself. Naomi Chen didn't want money. She wanted something far more valuable and far more dangerous to powerful men. She wanted the truth on record. The charges were filed, assault and battery. The video spread beyond social media into news coverage, think pieces, dinner table conversations. Within 48 hours, the Meridian Club had placed Naomi on paid administrative leave for her own safety, they claimed, though everyone understood it as the first move in a termination they couldn't yet legally justify. Marcus Townsend's initial statement called the incident a regrettable misunderstanding and expressed hope that cooler heads would prevail. His PR team worked overtime trying to reframe the narrative. She had been unstable, aggressive, looking for a payday. They floated rumors of past employment issues, mental health problems, a criminal record. None of it was true, but truth had never been the point. The point was creating enough smoke that people would doubt the fire. But the video kept playing, and playing, and playing. On the third day, a former Meridian Club server named Jennifer Washington posted her own statement on Twitter. Marcus Townsend had cornered her in the wine cellar 2 years earlier, she wrote. He'd made it clear that her employment depended on her silence. She'd quit instead. She'd never reported it because she'd known no one would believe her. Within 6 hours, 3 more women came forward, then 7, then 12. Not all the stories involved physical assault. Some were about verbal abuse, deliberate humiliation, threats disguised as jokes. But a pattern emerged, undeniable in its consistency. Marcus Townsend treated service workers, particularly women of color, as if they existed for his entertainment and disposal. Douglas Reeves went into crisis management mode. He reached out to Naomi's public defender, she couldn't afford private representation, with an offer. $5 million, an NDA, and all charges dropped. Her attorney, an exhausted woman named Grace Martinez, who handled 30 cases at a time, relayed the offer with barely concealed hope. Naomi, this is life-changing money. You could disappear. Start over anywhere. By pretending it didn't happen? By protecting yourself. These people, they have resources you can't imagine. They can make your life very difficult. They already did. He grabbed me. He shoved me. And he would have done worse if I hadn't stopped him. Grace rubbed her temples. I'm not arguing with you. I'm telling you the reality. We can win this case probably, but even if we win, the cost. Naomi, there are things worse than money. I know, Naomi said quietly. Silence is one of them. The offer was declined. Marcus's response was swift and predictable. His legal team filed a countersuit. Assault, emotional distress, defamation, loss of reputation, the amount $50 million. The news broke on a Friday afternoon. By Friday evening, a crowdfunding campaign for Naomi's legal defense had raised $200,000. By Saturday morning, it had crossed $3 million. By Monday, several prominent civil rights attorneys had offered their services pro bono. This was when Marcus Townsend first understood he might lose. His world had operated according to certain rules his entire life. Money bought silence, power bought compliance, influence bought whatever outcome he required. He had been sued before. Employment disputes, investor disagreements, a sexual harassment claim that settled for 7 figures and a sealed record. The system had always protected him, because the system was built by and for people exactly like him. But something had shifted. The video had made him visible in a way that money couldn't obscure. Every news segment showed the same sequence, his hand gripping, his body shoving, his advance being met with that precise, controlled defense that made him look exactly like what he was, a bully who had finally encountered someone who couldn't be bullied. His board called an emergency meeting. Several major clients placed contracts under review. 2 politicians he'd supported publicly announced they would return his campaign contributions. His face, once associated with innovation, became associated with something else entirely. He tried to understand where it had gone wrong. He had done what men in his position always did: assert dominance, punish insubordination, use his resources to control the narrative. It should have worked. It had always worked. What he couldn't grasp was that the rules had changed. Or perhaps that the old rules had never actually been rules at all, just the temporary patience of people with no other choice. Naomi's new attorney, a civil rights specialist named Thomas Reeves, no relation to Douglas, sat across from her in a conference room that still smelled like fresh paint. The non-profit firm had moved into the space 3 months ago, still operating on grants and donations, still idealistic enough to take cases they couldn't win. I need to know something, Thomas said. Where did you learn to fight like that? For the first time in days, something that might have been a smile touched Naomi's face. My father, he taught boxing at a community center in Oakland. He wanted me to know how to protect myself. Did he teach you restraint too? Because that's what I keep seeing in that video. You didn't hurt him. You could have, easily, but you didn't. He taught me that violence is expensive. You pay for it even when you win. So you only use exactly what's necessary, never more. Thomas nodded slowly. That's going to matter, because the other side will argue you're dangerous, unstable, that you used excessive force. But that video shows perfect control. You neutralized a threat and you stopped. That's textbook self-defense. Will it be enough? Honestly, I don't know. On paper, this is a slam dunk. But on paper, a lot of things should work that don't. You're black, you're working class, you put your hands on a white billionaire. There are people who will never forgive you for that, no matter what the video shows. So what do? We tell the truth, clearly, consistently, without apology. And we trust that enough people are ready to hear it. The preliminary hearing took place on a cold morning in January. The courtroom filled with reporters, activists, curious observers who'd been following the case online. Marcus sat at the defense table in a dark suit, his expression carefully neutral, flanked by 4 attorneys who'd collectively billed enough hours to fund a small school system. Naomi sat alone except for Thomas. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back the same way she'd worn it at the Meridian. She looked exactly like what she was, a young woman who'd been assaulted and had the audacity to defend herself. The prosecution presented the video. Then they presented Marcus's medical records from that night, no injuries beyond bruising to his ego and a scratch on his cheek from the marble floor. Then they presented statements from 6 witnesses, all confirming the same sequence of events. Douglas Reeves, handling the defense personally now, stood to present his case. Your Honor, what we have here is a clear case of disproportionate response. My client, yes, touched Ms. Chen's wrist. He was frustrated with poor service, understandably so, but her reaction was to physically assault him, using what can only be described as professional fighting techniques to inflict harm. Inflict harm? Thomas interrupted. Your client walked out of there with a scratch. If Ms. Chen had wanted to inflict harm, we'd be having a very different conversation. Exactly my point, Douglas said smoothly. She's clearly trained in combat. She knew exactly how to hurt someone. The fact that she chose to merely humiliate my client doesn't negate the assault. The judge, a black woman in her 60s named Constance Williams, looked unimpressed. Counselor, I've watched that video a dozen times. I've seen your client grab Ms. Chen. I've seen him push her into a table. And I've seen him advance on her while she had her hands up. At what point was she supposed to wait before defending herself? Until he hit her again? Your Honor, with respect, we're not here to... Answer the question, Counselor. When does a woman get to defend herself? After the first assault? The second? Or should she just accept whatever a man with more power decides to do to her? The courtroom went very still. Your Honor, Douglas said carefully, this isn't about gender or... Don't. Judge Williams's voice could have cut glass. Don't stand in my courtroom and pretend this isn't about exactly that. I'm denying the motion to dismiss. This case will go forward. And Mr. Reeves, I suggest you advise your client to think very carefully about whether he wants his behavior examined in a full trial. Marcus's face went white, then red, then white again. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Marcus pushed through them without comment, Douglas tight at his elbow. Naomi stopped at the microphones, Thomas beside her. Ms. Chen, how do you feel about today's ruling? Grateful, she said simply. Grateful that the truth matters. What do you want to see happen to Marcus Townsend? She paused, considering. I want him to understand that money doesn't make you untouchable. Power doesn't give you permission. And every person you treat as less than human is still human. Still worthy of dignity and respect. Are you worried about retaliation? I stopped being worried the moment I decided to tell the truth. Whatever happens now, at least it will be real. That night, Marcus sat in his downtown penthouse, 15 floors above the city, and tried to remember the last time he'd felt genuinely afraid. Not nervous about a business deal or concerned about quarterly earnings, but truly afraid in the way his body was afraid now, his hands trembling around a whiskey glass that cost more than most people made in a month. His phone buzzed. Another board member resigning. The third this week. He'd believed, genuinely believed, that silence could be bought, that witnesses could be managed, that money solved everything. But for the first time in his life, he faced something that didn't care about his bank account. Documented truth. The video existed, the witnesses existed, and unlike every other time, the victim wasn't willing to disappear. Douglas had laid out his options that afternoon, and none of them were good. Go to trial and risk a criminal conviction. Settle the civil case and admit guilt. Fight everything and watch his empire crumble while legal fees mounted and sponsors fled. There's one other option, Douglas had said quietly. A genuine apology. Public accountability, counseling, community service, show remorse, and maybe, the court and the public will show mercy. You want me to apologize to a waitress? Douglas had looked at him with something that might have been pity. I want you to apologize to a human being you assaulted. But I don't think you understand the difference yet. Now, alone in his penthouse, Marcus finally began to understand. Not because he'd learned empathy or experienced moral growth, but because he'd run out of money's ability to insulate him from consequences. The settlement offer came 3 weeks later. No charges dropped, but reduced sentencing recommendations in exchange for a guilty plea. Community service, mandatory counseling, a public apology, and restitution. Not to Naomi, but to a fund for service workers who'd experienced workplace harassment. His attorneys advised accepting. His PR team begged him to accept. Even his ex-wife, who'd divorced him 5 years earlier for reasons she'd never publicly specified, called to tell him to accept. Marcus Townsend, who had spent his entire life refusing to accept anything less than total victory, signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon in March. The apology was filmed and released. It lasted 90 seconds and was clearly scripted by attorneys, hitting every legally required point while managing to convey no genuine remorse whatsoever. But it existed. It was documented, and it couldn't be taken back. Naomi watched it once on her phone in the apartment she'd moved into with some of the crowdfunding money, not a penthouse, but clean and hers and far from the Meridian Club. When it ended, she felt nothing that resembled satisfaction, just a quiet settling, like dust after a storm. She'd expected vindication to feel different, bigger, more like justice. Instead, it felt like ending, which was its own kind of beginning. 3 months later, Naomi Chen stood in front of a community center in Oakland, the same one where her father had taught her to fight. She'd been invited to speak to a women's self-defense class, though she'd initially declined. Public speaking terrified her in ways that facing down a billionaire hadn't, but the instructor had insisted. They need to hear from someone who understands that fighting isn't about rage. It's about boundary setting. It's about saying no with your body when words aren't enough. So she stood in front of 20 women of all ages, all backgrounds, and tried to find words for something she still barely understood herself. I didn't want to hurt him, she said finally. I just wanted him to stop. And I think that's what people miss when they see that video. They think it's about revenge or getting even or making him feel what I felt. But it was never about any of that. It was about drawing a line and saying, this far, no further. A woman in the back raised her hand. But weren't you angry? Of course I was angry. I'm still angry. But anger by itself doesn't protect you. Control does. Discipline does. Knowing exactly what you're capable of and choosing to use only what's necessary, that's what keeps you safe. Not just physically, but morally. Because if I'd hurt him badly, if I'd lost control even for a second, he would have won. Not in court maybe, but in the story. I would have become the dangerous one, the violent one, and everything he said about people like me would have been validated. Another woman spoke up, younger, her voice uncertain. So we're supposed to just take it? Until we can defend ourselves perfectly? No, Naomi said firmly. You're supposed to take care of yourself in whatever way keeps you safest in that moment. Sometimes that's fighting. Sometimes it's running. Sometimes it's compliance until you can escape. I'm not here to tell you there's one right answer. I'm just here to tell you what worked for me in that specific moment with those specific circumstances. And what worked was that I knew how to defend myself without destroying him. I could draw the line without crossing one of my own. The class ended. Women approached her afterward, some for advice, some just to say thank you, some to share their own stories of moments when they'd had to choose between safety and dignity, and found some narrow path between them. She listened to every story. She didn't offer solutions because she didn't have them. She just offered presence, witness, the acknowledgement that their experiences were real and valid and mattered. On her way out, the instructor stopped her. "You did good in there. I mostly just talked about being scared." Exactly. They need to know it's okay to be scared. Fearlessness isn't real. Courage is just fear that's learned discipline. Naomi nodded, thinking about her father, about the hours in the gym, learning not just how to throw a punch, but when not to, about the difference between power and force, between strength and violence. "He would have liked you," she said. "Your father?" "Yeah. He always said the hardest part of fighting is stopping. Anyone can throw a punch. It takes real training to know when you've done enough." That night, alone in her apartment, Naomi thought about Marcus Townsend for the first time in weeks. She wondered if he'd learned anything, if the consequences had reached him in any meaningful way, if men like him were even capable of the kind of self-reflection that might prevent them from hurting someone else. She decided it didn't matter. She'd told her truth. She'd drawn her line. She'd defended herself without becoming the thing people feared she might be. And in doing so, she'd given other people permission to do the same, not by offering a blueprint or a perfect solution, but by simply refusing to be silent about what had happened to her. The video still existed. It would exist forever, immortalized in that particular way that digital media made both permanent and meaningless, 17 different angles of 1.4 seconds that had changed everything and nothing. But what mattered wasn't the video. What mattered was what came after. The choice to speak, the refusal of silence, the insistence that her dignity had value even when someone with more power said it didn't. Marcus Townsend had tried to teach her a lesson that night at the Meridian Club, about power, about hierarchy, about her place in the world he'd built. Instead, she'd taught him one. The lesson was simple. Some people, when pushed, don't push back. They stand firm. They draw a line. And they wait for you to make the choice about who you're going to be when that line is drawn. Marcus had made his choice, and so had she. And in the end, the only thing that really mattered was that she could live with hers, and he would have to live with his. In the quiet economy of justice, perhaps that was enough. Not the closure that endings promise, but the simple, difficult reality of consequence, witnessed and recorded, echoing forward into other stories, other moments, other people learning. That strength measured isn't strength wasted, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is survive with your integrity intact, prove that you were always exactly as strong as you needed to be, and walk away, knowing you chose restraint when rage was easier, chose truth when silence was safer, and chose to let the record speak when your own voice might have faltered.